Hello, my name is Thomas, and on this channel, British Culture Albion Never Dies, I look into British culture from a global perspective. So it was only a matter of time, really, before I got to the world of Harry Potter. Now, you might be forgiven for assuming that I've been a lifelong Harry Potter fan, and it's fair to say that since it came out, it's been pretty closely associated with me, but I never actually read it until this winter. That's for a range of reasons, because a lot of my life has been overseas. So when I was a kid in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, not reading Harry Potter wasn't really a big thing. I mean, if you hadn't read Keloğlan or Nasruddin Hoxha, that was much bigger. Of course, I was aware of it. The films came out, they were shown there. With an intermission, we didn't have automatic reel changes, but we all really enjoyed it. But being the only dark-haired, blue-eyed kid, he got pre-associated that I am Harry Potter in Saudi Arabia and later on in China. It became one of those kind of British things like James Bond or Mr. Bean on a bad day that was often associated with me. So I thought it's often stuck to me. When I came back to the UK, I thought it'd be really cool just to travel around and have some of the experiences in the UK that I've often heard about, maybe recommended to others, but not actually done myself, or not done for a really long time. So yeah, Harry Potter was all part of that. I was often going through King's Cross Station. I saw all the Harry Potter fans outside the shop, and I was kind of struck, thinking, wow, it's still going. It's been a very long time. Is this thing still relevant? And are the books all that good? My first entry was actually playing the Harry Potter video game, actually Hogwarts Legacy, so before Potter himself, but still at Hogwarts, set in the 19th century, and I really got engaged with the world of Hogwarts. I really enjoyed it. That really encouraged me to get into it. For that game, you have to choose your house, and I ended up being in yellow, which is exactly the same as most of the schools that I went to in the UK. They had the house system. I was normally sorted into a yellow house, and I read that it was about persistence and hard work, and I really liked that. So I identified with Hufflepuff. Ended up making this thing, which is a hat. I got really struck by Luna Lovegood in the movies and in the book makes a Gryffindor hat. So I thought, well, if there's a Gryffindor hat, why not a Hufflepuff hat for me? So I really enjoyed making that. Like I said, I really got into it. And then I read the books, and I think Hagrid says pretty early on that it's the house for people who are duffers. A load of duffers in Hufflepuff, I think he says. Lots of people told me I should be Ravenclaw because I love studying and I love books. I've taught at universities, and I really enjoy study. So actually, like a lot of people, when I read the books, I was struck by actually how much the kids do study. Because in the films, you're like, when are they doing their classes? The plot doesn't give them time for actually doing exams and classes. And I started to think, wow, J.K. Rowling really understands education. I've worked in English language education, for example, for years and years, and I've been a teacher trainer, and I saw a lot of things in the book that really related to that. So yeah, I was in no way surprised to discover that J.K. Rowling had been an English teacher, English as a foreign language. There are certain little things like, I've watched hundreds of teachers as a teacher trainer and assessor. So one thing I really notice is that a new teacher will often create loads and loads of material, like new stage, new handout, that kind of thing, whereas a really experienced professional, they might have one thing the size of a beer mat or a chocolate frog card, and they'll hand that round, and they'll find 100 different ways to use it, right? And that's similar to when we're learning a language. When we first start learning a language, it's all about vocabulary. You've got to learn the words. You have to. It's not a stage you can skip. You have to have that. But pretty soon you get into using those words in more and more different ways. You've got to learn, 200 to 300 words for day-to-day use, but then using those in a myriad different ways is what give all of our lives their individuality, right? So it's really important to learn depth as well as breadth. As I was reading the book, when J.K. Rowling was talking about spells in the wizarding world, she might introduce a spell or introduce a concept, or house elf, for example. And then you'd learn more and more about how that can work in different scenarios, in different ways. And I really appreciated that. Like I said, I felt that was something that an English teacher would do. And she might seed things. I think every writer tries to do this, but she does it really well. She seeds things really early on in the books that then have a big payoff later on. Again, as a teacher, you do that. You know, in the warm, you might elicit something from the student, you activate schemata, and then later on, maybe in the final task, it's half an hour later, people weren't necessarily consciously thinking of it, but it's been there in the mind, rolling around, they've been mulling over it, and suddenly it's there in the final task and everyone's using it. So I see lots of things that an English teacher would do. I'm recording this on a genuinely hot summer's day, so a bit of butterbeer is actually very, very refreshing. I like how, again, more in the books and the films, the kids are always going to the pub and they're having their butterbeer. I feel that's very, very, very British. There's a lot of aspects about it that are, I think, really British. That's something I was kind of expecting because it's so identified with Britishness. There's the school system, there's a kind of cultural conservatism. Like, there's no reason the wizards should have a steam train. They could have an electric train. The way the wizards look at muggle lives, non-wizarding lives, and are kind of amused by all the labour-saving devices, you know, kettles and washing machines and all that kind of thing. They seem kind of amused by it, and there seems something quite British in that recalcitrant attitude. Oh, recalcitrant. I should surely learn to be a better English teacher. Should have learned to be better at pronunciation. But yeah, there's that kind of attitude towards new things. Like the UK still has red telephone boxes. We all have mobile phones, but we still have them, and we're trying to find uses for them. You know, you'll find a wall that's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, don't know what it's for, but we'll keep it because, you know, maybe the next generation will find a use for it, maybe my generation won't. There's that kind of cultural conservatism. There's also an attitude towards authority, which I think is endemic to Harry Potter and British culture at large. Like, our heroes are like James Bond, who is a government agent. He is a government man. He may not be a good man in himself, but the idea that he's, you know, licensed by the British government to do what he does is an important part of the whole setup, right? So Harry Potter, you know, his dream is to be an auror, basically a policeman, and that attitude towards authority is very different. Like, the UK has James Bond, America has Jason Bourne, who's kind of anti-authority and showing how authority in itself can be a really bad thing. Whereas in the UK, it's about how authority can be a bad thing if bad people are in power, but it can also be turned to be a good thing. It amplifies your power. There's a difference in how we view authority that I think carries through. And we see the ministry, you know, we start to see it first as a ministry to be respected, then we start to see how there's a bit of corruption, and then we start to see the ministry taken over by really bad people, and then of course it has to be revolutionised by the good people. So I think that attitude towards power, again, is very British, and you might kind of tie it into our Civil War. You know, we had a bad king, Charles I, just wasn't a great effective king, fell out with his parliament. We had a civil war, replaced the king with something better, turned out to be so much worse, and we ended up with the Restoration. So we have King Charles II bringing back the glory, bringing back the monarchy. I think there's a certain element of that going through the Harry Potter books. In terms of the writing, I really, really enjoyed them. The first couple were exactly like the first two movies that I really, really enjoyed. I enjoy the movies less and less as they go on. I started to realise that's partly to do with plot lines being stripped out and people being stripped out. So there's a lot of characters, I guess side characters from a movie's point of view. There's a lot of people who populate this world who are really, really interesting, who just aren't in the movies. One interesting side effect of all these characters being cut out is that, you know, Winky the house elf, for example, she gets cut out. We don't have a huge amount of Percy in the movies, and when these characters get cut out, it actually decreases the world building, because J.K. Rowling world builds in a way that I find really, really interesting. Now, I know that she has criticised online a huge amount for her world building, and I think that makes sense. If you started fantasy with Harry Potter and then you moved on, you'll find a lot of other authors who are really keen on writing the rules, the regulations, the history, the stories of the world in which their fantasy story is set. I sometimes don't enjoy this so much. I love J.R. Tolkien, but a lot of authors try and kind of Tolkien without his panache, without his refinement, and without his hard work over decades, literally decades, a lifetime. J.K. Rowling does expand her world, but she does it by Harry Potter meeting interesting people. We learn about the people and we learn about the world in which they live, and that's essential. Harry Potter is learning about the wizarding world through the wizards and witches that he meets. that influences his point of view, that influences kind of his perspectives, and therefore our perspective, because we read these books rarely from Harry's point of view, and he's a kid. So sometimes it's criticised saying, it doesn't have a very good economic system. Well, J.K. Rowling isn't spending pages and pages explaining how the banking system works. What she's doing is explaining Harry's journey and the journey of his friends. That's the important thing, and that's why it's so accessible to people all over the world. That's why it's accessible to non-fantasy fans, right? If you're a fantasy fan, a sci-fi fan, maybe this kind of world building is your thing and you love it. But I think people are interested in people, and the fact that she focuses on the people, and as I say, she uses them neatly to expand the world, but it's done so gently that even if you're not a fan of fantasy, wizardry, dragons, that kind of thing, even if you're not into that, it's still really accessible. So I think she does it really, really well. And in fact, obviously, aside from Tolkien, I think she is one of the best. So yeah, Harry Potter. I've been getting into it over the last year. I very much enjoyed making my my badger head. That's the animal for Hufflepuff, if you want to wear. I'm enjoying trying out all the various treats, chocolate frogs, and the jelly beans not so much. There are a few too many gross flavours compared to the nice flavours. But overall, I'd say it's a really good example of Britishness. It's really good fun to read them, especially the last few. The first ones were absolutely fine. I've been enjoying going to the locations, I've been playing the video game, and I've got a longer podcast, so if you're really interested in a slightly more nuanced view of all this, then you can check out that half-hour podcast where I give far more of my views. For now, I just have to say cheers. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I very much enjoyed doing this whole setup. The foley was pretty easy to put together, but things like this, they take a bit longer. Cheers.